Are live and we are live and welcome to Leading Dragon's very first live on LinkedIn and my YouTube channel. And we have the wonderful Dennis Pitocco. Good morning to you, Dennis. Dennis, all the way from Miami. How are you?
Hi, Deb. So thank you for allowing me to be your first guest live. This is really exciting. Obviously, we followed each other for a long time. As I've said to you before, I really love your dragon magic and everything that brings to the table. So a real pleasure to be here.
And the honor is mine too. So thank you, Dennis. And before we dive in and I hand the mic over to you, a lot of people have recently been asking me, why water? What is it about water? What is it that is symbolic around water? Well, water is first cleansing, and water is life, because without water, there is no life. But going a step further, for me, water is if we were to experience our lives like water flows through rocks and mountains, we would be choosing a lot more joy over suffering. And so this is the spirit of the dragon. So the leading dragon who stands in their power and leads with flow. So over to you, Dennis. Dennis, we met earlier this year. You are the founder and the the co-publisher of the award-winning BIZCATALYST 360 Degrees. We were introduced, like I said, earlier this year. I'm a very proud featured contributor amongst the thousands of others that you have around the world. And you are a trailblazer.
Well, thank you.
You had roughly 30 years of banking experience behind you, and then it seems like you completely pivoted right off and you decided to do something completely different, which is not for profit, which is actually for the greater good. So on that note, I'd love to hand the mic over to you, Dennis. Thank you for being with us and tell us a little more about where you are and who you are today.
Well, thanks for tipping the iceberg of my background, because as you said, Deb, I'm what I would call the accidental publisher, because I pivoted from 30 some years in a banking career to doing what we do today. And we're just coming up on our 10th anniversary in another month. So it's been quite a ride. And I think our time has come. And let me tell you what I mean by that. As you know, the ethos behind what we do under the umbrella of 360 Nation, which I can get into a little later what that means, but the ethos behind that is simply doing good. There's a fundamental idea of rediscovering humanity, and there's also a responsibility when you try and accomplish that. And we've been we've been knocking on the door of humanity, for lack of a better term, for about 10 years now. And they say within all adversity, there's opportunity. Well, it just so happens that as the pandemic kicked in around the world, it appears to us, or we've felt over the last, say, 18 months now almost, that the door to humanity opened a little bit, because suddenly we around the world are kind of in the same boat for a while. Many people have more time, and they've got more time either because they're not traveling to work right now because they're working from home. So there seems to be a lot of sitting back and thinking, and I don't want to sound like I'm painting everybody with the same brush, but there's a growing majority of people that we felt that want to retouch or rediscover humanity, whatever that means. It could be writing from their heart. It could be changing jobs. It could be reinvesting in their relationship. So as the pandemic started to kick in, we thought on our publishing division that things would slow down and people would be distracted. And frankly, Deb, we had a lot of people coming to us that know us well and say, you should probably just turn the lights off for a while and spend more time with your family because the pandemic's kicking in. And we thought about it, but not for long, because we said, wait a minute, this is where we define who we are. We're talking about rediscovering humanity. You don't disappear because humanity's having some challenges. So we decided to open that door wide, and we went out to all of our writers back then and said, look, we're hanging around here, and we know a lot of you going through challenges, but here's what we would like you to do. if you desire to keep writing in the midst of all the change and turmoil, there's always a time for leadership articles and sales and marketing and all the typical HR. But we think that time's changed right now. We think there needs to be a lot more heart-based writing going on and storytelling, so people out around the world know that they're not alone. So if you choose to write during this time, bring it on. Now, back to my point, we thought things would slow down. From the moment we said that, through that entire, rest of last year, we just had record volume coming in from our writers. It seems like with that extra time, people started telling stories of how the changing world was impacting them personally, or their jobs, or their careers. So long story short, we think that's when people said, wait a minute, we really like this notion of humanity. We like the way we're heading. And now we see a number of people that they don't want to go back to where they were, whatever that means. So if they have a choice, Deb, you and I talked about the word choice recently. If they have a choice and if they have the ability to do so, they want to go in a different direction. So it's remarkable to watch, but we felt like in the last couple of years, what we've been working towards has finally started to happen.
Wow, Dennis, thank you for that beautiful introduction, and it's just so full of, golden nuggets. You talk about adversity, which is opportunity. You talk about living with and encouraging the ethos, which brings on responsibility. You reached out. You are, how I see it, you are both a free spirit and you're also a responsible leader. And I would like to move to that word of choice. And there's something that you said earlier about choice, which is, well, when you do have the choice. So I guess we'll park that to the side, because I would like to get into that a bit later on. So going back to you, Dennis, I'd love to hear a bit more, and the listeners too would love to hear more about what brought you to a fairly sort of conservative career path.
Yeah.
A very secure, financially secure, with great visibility and all the perks that comes with it. What brought you to step off that bandwagon and just go completely into a humanity-based and values-driven initiative?
Well, thanks for that question. It's a great one. I think I've always had the entrepreneurial spirit. Much harder to spread those entrepreneurial wings when you're in a structure like banking. But even during my banking days, I kind of spun off from that a bit and got into opening businesses around the world, and exploring a bit more and being able to just make things happen. In fact, it was during the time that I was opening a business in United Kingdom that I met my wife. So and then somewhere along the line, this goes back a little over a decade ago, after my wife and I got together, we were blessed because whatever businesses I was involved in, I sold them, and we decided to settle down here in Tampa. And the best analogy, and I've used this before, Deb, it's the old analogy of the dog chasing the car. And now you finally caught the car. What are you going to do with it? Well, we caught the car. We were blessed to be able to say, we're relatively young. We can retire, but we don't want to. We're too young to start doing crossword puzzles and playing Sudoku. So what are we going to do with our time? And that really, that's a tough discussion to have, because you got a lot of years ahead of you. And we don't need to do something that makes money to survive. So that gives you even more choices. So we talked about it. We walk every morning about 3 to 5 miles. And during one of our morning walks, Deb, we talked about, how do we carve up the time? We ended up saying that we wanted to follow three paths. One, and not necessarily in any particular order here, but one of which was nonprofits and giving back. Everybody during my career and during my wife's career, even before we were together, we both had a heart to serve, but because of the structures of our jobs, we couldn't. We both remember there being international disasters where the Red Cross needs people, but you can't just leave your job for 6 months to go help them. So we said, look, we're going to devote at least a third of our time to giving back. And I'm talking about three ways: our time, our talent, and our treasure. A lot of people can just write a check, but we want to roll up our sleeves and give back. So we started down that path, which I can come back to later. And that path has just continued to expand in so many different ways. So giving back in the trenches, as we call it, is one thing we want to do. The other thing we wanted to do is we wanted to travel intentionally. As you're in business, I was in business. You know, you travel the world, and I can tell you so many countries I've been to, but I can only tell you about the airport, the building I'm in, and then the taxi cab, because I never got to see the city. My wife did the same in her career. So we said, we're going to now look at the world differently. And we're going to intentionally travel, starting with the fact we want to see the rest of the world before we see America. As you would expect, America is so big. I think a statistic I read not long ago is about 60% of the population here has never left the country. Why? There's just so much country to see. We said, no, we want to see the rest of the world first, but we're going to pick out those countries and those locations that we've never seen before. So that was part of a travel. So you have those two pieces. Then we said, we want to keep the mind active. And that's where the website came from, because we said, you know, during our careers, I ultimately got into some consulting work. My wife did the same. We were constantly thirsting for a place to go on the internet where we could get good information written by people in the real world, not from the Harvard Business Review, but people actually living their lives. And we wanted to be able to visit something that didn't have pop-ups in your face and all these offers and advertising. And because we were blessed to be able to just do what we wanted, we created BIZCATALYST 360. And it was driven by the fact to be able to say to people like you, Deborah, if you would like to write, you've got a home with us. There's no catches. There's no costs. There's no advertising. There's no pop-ups. There's no expectations, which means, Deb, if you're a writer and you want to write once a year or once a month or once a week, the reason we got those kind of caveats is we went to other writers 10 years ago and said, look, who do you write for and where's the headaches? And they all said pretty much the same thing. If I write for Forbes, I've got to write in this format. It's going to be covered with advertising. I've got to write a minimum of one article a month. I've got to pay them to be what they call some kind of a contributor. And so we went down the list of all these things and said, we're going to break all those rules now because we're not forming this site to make money. Now, let me also say that neither one of us have any technology background. So we did it the old-fashioned way. We taught ourselves how to do what you now see as BIZCATALYST. And let me also say we made every mistake you could possibly make. I remember waking up over in the UK about 6 years ago, and the website was gone one morning. It was because I did something stupid the night before. But when you have those come to Jesus moments, you don't forget. Anyhow, so it's like many websites, it's a work in progress. It's never done, but it's been a joy. And all those three things allow us to travel. We can give back to nonprofits, and we can do the website anywhere in the world.
And Dennis, I honestly, I just love what you shared about, you know, you really took that time with your spouse to sit together, to walk together, and to see how can we best give back.
Yeah.
And that's such a purposeful choice that you made. And I love those 3 T's, which are time, talent, and treasure. And honestly, yeah, BIZCATALYST. I mean, the website is so rich. How many featured contributors do you have in total today?
We're just about at the 900 mark across the world. Wow. In fact, I have a request for anybody tuning in here. We've got somebody on every continent except Antarctica. So if anybody out there knows one writer in Antarctica, would they please have them reach out?
We've got, I can see we've got DJ. Hello, DJ from Miami too. So thank you for joining us. And yes, she says, I would love to write. And this is what and this brings back to you, Dennis, and BIZCATALYST 360, is not only did you create this platform for the greater good, and not only did you do it to showcase talent, but it's also you're helping people believe in themselves, believe in their talents, and encouraging people to create, because you're providing that safe space, that safe hub, and not only where their works, but where their works will be shown in a safe space where people, lift each other up, and also where authentic relationships happen.
Well, thank you for that, because I know from speaking to writers over the years, to say to a writer like you, Deb, look, it doesn't matter what you'd like to write about, just spread your wings. Now, that's pretty daunting to some writers, because maybe you're a leadership expert or maybe you're a human resource expert. But to say to people that know how to write, don't limit yourself to your occupation, go further than that. And that's where a lot of that heart-based writing comes from. And there's not, people say to me all the time, particularly new writers, what resonates, what's topical, what's popular right now, because they want to move to the world that they're going to get more likes or more engagement. And, if you asked me that 5 or 6 years ago, I probably would have said any article talking about integrity, because it was in the news. And maybe there was a lack of it around the world. But now I would say, without question, the best thing to do is tell stories, but tell authentic stories. People would rather read something that Deb is going through and has survived to come up on the other end, real life, versus something that they got out of a book somewhere. Why? Because when they read those stories, when our audience read those stories, many of them feel like they're looking in a mirror, like they've been through that before. And it says to them, yes, I'm not alone. And Deb survived that, whatever it was. And maybe I can get some wisdom. And that's where we believe the real connections come from, because you're connecting with what that person's writing, and you feel inspired to comment on Deb's writing. And next thing you know, Deb and that person are connected. And here we go. That's authentic connection, in our opinion.
And that's the magic. That's the magic that you have enabled between people, and that's what's really beautiful. So, Dennis, you're definitely an exemplary leader, and you talked about stories. And we know that the story, there's sort of a crescendo, isn't there?
Yeah.
And then there's this. We talked about adversity earlier on. So typically, this is when I remember in one of my stories, one of my key stories is about adversity and experiencing like I was free falling.
Yeah.
And that is just one costume that fear wears. And going back to the leading dragon, which is the spirit who stands in their power and leads with flow.
Oh boy.
That means, I mean, we do have fear moments. We are fearful at times, and it's what we do with that fear. Dennis, if you may, I'd like you to share with us a moment where, or perhaps a situation or a time in your life where you were faced with this fear, which is adversity, stress, worry, anxiety, but it's all linked to this energy of fear.
Yeah,
like that, and how you moved through it. And you didn't allow it to stifle you from reaching your objectives.
I just love your questions, because that just hits to the heart of a lot of what we believe in. It's kind of shaped me personally and us. And the quick answer is, it goes back to my professional career. Early in my career, and this is both a curse and a blessing. The curse came from the situation. The blessing came from the outcome. And what I mean by that, Deb, is early in my career, I was in my early 20s. I was kind of moving up in the banking world, and I was fortunate to be tucked under or reporting to one of what people would call one of the icons of the banking industry in the USA. So this guy was really well known, very well respected. Everybody knew him. And for me to be, I hate to say it, mentored by him was a real opportunity for me. I really appreciated that. So here we go. We're working together for a few years. And at some point, working with my accounting team that reported to me, I discovered, and this probably translates pretty well, I discovered that my boss was cooking the books, as they say. So there were some significant misreporting of key financial items going on. Now, I'm a junior guy. He's an icon in the industry. He reports to the chairman of the bank, and this was a big bank. I was faced with a tough decision when I went home that night. What do you do with that information? I could go along and get along and probably continue to ride on his coattails. I could make the choice to open the door to all that I've discovered, but I'd have to go to his boss with it, obviously. So I think, and I don't want to sound like a Boy Scout here, but I had to define myself at that moment because that was going to do one of two things. I was either going to lose my job because this guy was an icon and he was very friendly with the chairman. They weren't just employee. They were longtime career friends. I was going to lose my job or something else was going to happen. And I came in the next morning and said, there's only one thing I can do. I got to take this to the chairman and I'm just going to take the punches. This sounds terrible, but I'm happy to say that about a week later, my boss, the guy that was cooking the books, decided to spend more time with his family, as they say, and he retired early and they moved me into his position.
Oh, wow.
But that goes back to a saying or a quote that you've probably heard, Deb, that I've used repeatedly ever since then. And I can't tell you who authored this quote, but I've grabbed it. And it's the idea of doing the right thing, even when nobody else is watching.
Mm-hmm. That's integrity, right?
Yeah, exactly. The definition. And how many times in my career, you've probably seen it, even in your personal life, there are times where you can make a choice to do the right thing and wrong thing, and you can get away with the wrong thing. But I've taken that opportunity that I learned there, and it was scary. I mean, I was on a cliff. I'm young in banking, and I could be tarnished by being fired. Who's going to believe me? If you think about it, I'm the young guy, the icon I'm working for. Of course, he's doing everything right. So, but boy, did that just garnish my desire to do the right thing. And since that time, during my career in banking, I was repeatedly faced with similar circumstances, not as dire as that, where there was an easy choice then, because I had already jumped off that cliff. I knew there was water down there now that I've survived that crisis, if you will. And it gave me all the confidence. And I think over time, that just becomes part of your character. And that's the rest of my story. And it's been a guiding force up until the moment we're talking today, because we are continually, day to day, faced with choices that you can get away with.
Dennis, I'd like to, if you can, I'd like you to visualize back to that time when you had to make that decision. So you went home that evening, having caught your boss cooking the books, as you say, right? And what is it that you felt? And inside, what is it that you felt? I'm not going to put any labels on it. And how did you choose to not allow that feeling to prevent you from doing the right thing?
I felt vulnerable. I felt scared. I mean, all those things that you think, I'm going to lose my career. I need to work. I just go down that list of scary adjectives. But I'm going to back up to, I'm also a man of faith. And I've learned when there's nothing else out there, you can fall back on your faith. The world isn't black and white to me. There's a middle thing. It's called faith. I prayed. And I just got this warm feeling that this is what I need to do, because you have to, as you would expect, if you look at the alternative, you just suck it up, keep your mouth shut and move forward. Can you live with that for many, many years to come? And how many lives could be affected by what this gentleman was doing? Because it was just a matter of time before it was going to be discovered by somebody someday. And guess what? Then I become part of the problem because I should have known better. So all those emotions, but I don't think I could have lived with defining myself with lack of character. Scary times, though. It wasn't easy. And boy, I didn't sleep that night before. I'll tell you that.
No kidding.
You're walking into the skyscraper the next morning, knowing you're going to the top floor to meet with the chairman, who has no idea why I'm coming, but has agreed to see me. And I'm going to be taking a torpedo shot at one of his best friends. Just scary.
Yeah, I can imagine your legs probably were not quite stable going up the stairs.
Amen. As well, my teeth were chattering as well, Deb.
Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, that is, wow, that's one hell of a story, and like you say, that's defined you, and that's your courageous vulnerability.
Vulnerability, that's a good word. I love that word, vulnerability.
Yeah, because it's through that you can reconnect with your true integrity and your core values.
Well, I didn't know it at the time, Deb, but that's exactly what was happening. And I'm blessed to be able to say that happened early enough in my career that I took advantage of it from that point forward. Because you always have that, when you're going through life, something has to ground you. And now it can be my faith, but professionally, it was easy from that point forward. Is it right or is it wrong? And if it's right, I'll do it. If it's wrong, I'm not going to do it. Where you might second guess that, particularly if you're clawing your way up corporate America.
Yeah, and you took a huge risk.
Oh.
That day, and I imagine it wasn't the first and the last risk that you've taken either. But this is where, as long as we are risk averse and our energy, and we're operating from a space of contracted energy, where we're fearful of the outcome, of the what ifs, that who could say what, the judgments, the criticisms, all this stuff. With this contracted energy, we're stuck. And when we look at where, how, I have to say it, a lot of the corporations are riddled with sickness, with toxic cultures, toxic policies, and organizational leaders are desperately trying to find, new training programs, new models, new systems. What do you, and especially in this time of the pandemic, where there's just chaos and uncertainty, and we're not seeing the end of the tunnel just yet. How do you see, let me phrase that differently. What do you believe that all of us can do differently to move into, a brighter, less toxic, and a healthier way of living?
Well, I'm going to answer that two ways. There's a personal way, and it's a quote that I've embraced over the years from somebody you probably know, Albert Einstein. And he said, there are two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle, and the other is though everything is a miracle. And let that be your guiding force, that you can still, discover joy, discover honesty, discover, and make sure that you never get so worn down by that toxicity you talked about, that you can still look up. And beyond that, I'm going to sound redundant here, but it's the same advice I've given to so many people, some of which I mentored. Ground yourself with the idea of doing the right thing. And I don't mean just when nobody else is watching. That's the broader quote. But and I've had people say to me, well, how do you know what the right thing is? And my answer to that is probably from childhood. At a certain age, you start to understand what's right and wrong, even though mom and dad are telling you, what's right, what's wrong. And so I don't accept the fact that people don't know what the right thing. I'm going to expand upon this a little. I also believe whether you're doing the right thing or wrong thing, it comes full circle. We have seen, my wife and I have seen so much good karma come back to us. And I'm talking in our personal lives. And I'll give you a strange example, but it's one of many. I remember we were in a major department store. This goes back probably 5-6 years ago. And we were going through the checkout, and the cashier gave us too much back in change from our, whatever we were spending. I was walking out and I noticed that, and I went back and talked to her, and she looked, and it turns out she did. And she said, you know what? I would have lost my job if you didn't come back and talk to me, because we've had such a problem with shortages, and they would think I'm guilty. Now, you think it's a small amount of change, but think of what it did for that lady's life. And that's a little microcosm of doing the right thing. But when I say about good karma, I think that moment came back to us many times over, and other things that we've encountered personally, where it may have been more of a challenge, but the good karma kicked in and we benefited from that. So it's kind of reinvesting in yourself when you're doing the right thing for others.
As we say, what goes around comes round.
Amen. And it certainly does. And I would say the same thing about doing the wrong thing, I think.
Yeah. What goes around comes round. And so that's a lovely piece. And That's because you are connected with yourself. You're a conscious leader, and I would like to take a piece of go into that realm of conscious leadership, because we're talking about it so much today. We're talking so much about servant leadership, conscious leadership, compassionate leadership, and I do believe that there is a collective rising of awareness around us. But at the same time, so many people are still stuck in their own, and we go back to choices. They're stuck in their choices. They believe they don't have any choice. They don't but this goes back to your story about how you chose to go to the top floor the next day and share with the chairman of the bank what was going on downstairs. And that can be copy pasted across any situation.
Oh, well, excellent point, Deborah. Look at you mentioned the word toxic earlier, and I can connect that to cultures. And I'm going to just grab this right out of the headlines. Look at all the cultures that are being dismantled now because executives are being outed. It could be the Me Too movement. It could be a lot of other movements like that, where people are now getting bolder and braver. You talk about fear. Can you imagine going into the corporate suite under the Me Too movement? Similar to, I went into a situation where you'd be either chased out or riddled, or just fired, whatever they do to people that are whistleblowers. But there seems to be more opportunity now, and that many of those toxic cultures that people thought 10 years ago couldn't even be tampered with are collapsing under their own weight, which is just marvelous to see, because it's like the good people are finally rising, and they have a voice, and they're finding their voice, and they're feeling, you used a word earlier, they're feeling safe, they're feeling comfortable enough to share their voice in situations that are scary.
Yeah. And talking about collapsing systems, whilst there's some people over here, and it's happening anyway, and it's taking, I'm quite impatient. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's still so much to be done, right? But whilst that's happening on this side, as leading dragons like you and me, our responsibility and our duty is to step aside and build the new infrastructure. Because whilst that's collapsing, we need to know what's going to be happening after that. And I think it's when we go into organizations, it gets extremely complex. This complexity of matrices and systemic just governance that's just piled on with so many layers just to make it so complex. I think there's a lot of also stripping of these layers that's going on now.
Very, very good point, because think about what's happening during the pandemic around the world. You have the corporate offices in America and elsewhere where the guys that are so used to those matrices and structures that said, my employees will never work from home. Now, this is before the pandemic, because they could give you every reason in the book why it wouldn't work. Well, many of those same people have reversed their thinking. Number one, because they didn't have any choice. Number two, because it works. And suddenly they're saving money because they don't need these big facilities. The guys and the gals that are struggling are the ones that I've had some interaction with some of them. Suddenly, it's like the emperor has no clothes, as they say, which means they're used to being in the corner office. And if there was any issues, a junior manager or human resources would take care of it. Now they're having to do things like you and I are doing. They have to come out of that office and be virtually visible to their employees and try to build them up and keep them motivated from afar. And then they have to trust them. They have to trust that even though Deborah's 5,000 miles away, she's still going to do her job. And in my experience, Deborah would be more productive doing her job from home in many respects. So we see that change in the corporate environment, where there's the guys and gals that didn't want it to happen, or still trying to find their legs. And there's the ones that love it, because now the world is kind of shifting that way, and productivity is going up, expenses are going down, and they're actually getting closer to their people from a distance, if that makes any sense to you.
Yeah, and it's very much that organizations don't change, but people do.
Amen.
And people do. So since people do, we go back to this choice thing. And I still know a lot of people who just keep going. They're still waiting to go back to the old normal. This is like we're coming up to 2 years. What do you mean the old normal? There is no more old normal going back to. So this is, and I think it's that phase of denial where, oh my God, well, we can't possibly, do this flex stuff going, this virtual working, and how am I going to keep micromanaging my team? How am I going to keep the dynamics that were going in the office now on a virtual level?
And then you've got the executives, Deb, that have to learn these things like empathy and compassion, because in a corner office, you don't really have to deal with a lot of that what we call soft skills, because human resources handled that. But now Dennis has to face his people, and they're going through tough times because of the pandemic. And I've got to learn, if you can learn such a thing, empathy, or just, again, I said compassion. There's so many other words around that, gratitude, being a little more forgiving, whatever you want to call it. Which, frankly, in most leadership courses I took during my banking years, they don't teach those kind of skills. It's all hard-edged banking 101. And unless you learn it in life, either in your childhood, it's a new world and it's a scary world, using that word again, for some of these top-level executives. I've seen so many webinars and things like that crop up to teach soft skills over the last couple of years.
And that's exactly the problem. Is we stay, as long as we keep looking on the outside for solutions. Let's buy this program. Let's go and get this consultancy in.
Yes.
Let's get this external advisor in. Let's blame it on the employees.
Exactly.
Whatever it is, it's until we realize that we are disconnected from ourselves, and we start reconnecting with what truly matters, and really it comes back to bringing that humanity, bringing our own humanity, and moving from being human doings to human beings. Somebody once said that to me a few years ago. Deborah, we're not human doings, we're human beings. And wow. I had lived the first 45 years of my life as a human doing. I was ticking boxes, making sure that I got approval left, right, and center, that I got external validation, and my self-worth was entirely based on other people's opinions of me. Because since we're very little, since we're toddlers, starting with our parents, babies even, we're taught to fit in. We're taught to comply. We're taught to respect the system. So when this goes on, you from 0 to 10 to 10 to 20, and then into adulthood, and then furthermore, sometimes it takes, half a century to wake up and realize that, wow, actually, wait a minute, I've just been bowing down and trying to fit in. I don't want to do this anymore. I want to be me. I'm not going to be spending my life still ticking boxes and being a human doing. I'm actually going to start being a human being.
Well,
I believe this is something that you are, Dennis. You are rather than a human doing, ticking boxes and forgetting how to be. You are a human being, and in your being, you're doing what you need to do.
I absolutely love that term, human doing, human being. We've got a couple writers that write a lot about getting rid of the word resources in human, because you're just looked at as a resource. Let's stop that. But for the companies, that's some of the negative stuff. But from the companies that have discovered, and many of these companies have discovered it before the pandemic. Let's just say the pandemic created a wake-up call for many companies. But for those that have discovered that real human being factor, boy, they're just going to be wildly successful. I know I don't know if you're faced with this over in Europe, but across this country, there are so many help wanted signs now. So many people that don't want to go back to that world at any level. And so the smart companies are bringing in, if they already have the human being culture, they're making sure people now know about it. It was like the best kept secret, but it is now a competitive a recruiting factor beyond salary. Because you can get the big bucks, but would you trade them to be a human being in your environment? And won't you go farther and faster in that? So interesting to watch that transition from afar. On the other hand, there are so many companies are struggling because they just don't know. This is like an avalanche hitting them. They don't know how to do it. And why can't I hire people? Sad to say, they're probably going to be left in the dust by the better companies.
But it's interesting about these hierarchies, because organizational structures they are perfect for people who are controlled by fear.
Yep.
Okay, so that's perfect.
Yep.
So they are human doings. They're definitely not human beings, because that's just going to pose problems and cause threats. So just stay being a human doing. That's good. Keep doing what you need to do from Monday to Friday, clock in, clock out, and move on. I don't care whether you're disengaged, passively or actively. You're just 80% of the workforce, which is one of the.
It's funny.
Yeah.
Whenever I'm in a chat like this, I always pick up jewels, and that what you just said, human beings, human doings. I'm going to steal that, but I will always give you credit for
it. Yeah. No, that's. I mean, that's it. That's exactly it. So if we're moving to more, and I think this is what's happening, and this is the blessing. One of the key blessings, isn't it, from the pandemic, is that we're having to reconnect with ourselves.
Yeah.
We're having to sit with ourselves and look at what is the legacy that we want to live in order to leave behind. And it is scary, yes. And so we're going back to the fear thing. It is scary anyway. It's not like a nice walk in the forest. And when you realize that there's massive change that you can choose to make in your life, what are you going to do with that? And how are you going to harness that fear?
Well, we're back to choices, aren't we?
We're back to choices again. Isn't everything a choice?
It is. It is. You're right. So, wow.
So, wow, this is we could keep going, Dennis, and
yeah, we could.
I'm really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I'm really honored to host you on my first live. And I'd like to invite you to leave the audience with one takeaway, something that they can take with them and leave them to chew on.
Well, I'm going to go back to the theme we've been talking about today, and it's going to tie humanity. It's going to come tie choices, and you'll see this if you go to our website, because we try so hard, Deb. We don't want to be the website that says all these wonderful things like you and I talk, but we try to walk the talk. We walk it in every decision we make. We ground ourselves in things that we do for our writers by saying, is this consistent with our values? And one of the values that drives our rediscovering humanity is something we have up on the site. And it says, being human is given, but keeping our humanity is a choice. And there's a difference there.
Oh, I love that.
You know, there's a broadness to that statement. We all know we can be human, but grounding yourself in your humanity. And people say, well, what does that mean? Well, that's all those wonderful values that, Deb, you and I could talk about for an hour. You know, acceptance, joy, humility, gratitude, generosity, compassion, some of which we've talked about today, kindness. That's the humanity that we want people to keep, particularly right now where there's so much negativity and adverse out there. Let's go back to some of those, because they don't cost you anything, but I heard something recently. We were talking to somebody in a nonprofit, and it was, there's so much you can do with so little. And that is just act of kindness. And we can go down that path, but just keep our humanity, particularly in these trying times right now. Don't lose sight of that, and it will serve you well.
Yeah. So faced with fear, faced with adversity, faced with uncertainty, let's reach out to each other rather than silo off, which we're typically used to doing. And that's just going to make the ride a little less rocky, perhaps.
Amen. Deb, I noticed while we were talking, there was a gentleman named DJ Durante who said he would like to write. Now, staying true to our commitment, I'm just going to put in the chat stream. There's a link that gentleman can go to if he'd like to explore the opportunity to write for us.
Yeah, DJ's a wonderful lady who you met earlier, who's in Miami.
Oh,
also.
wonderful.
Yeah. So I'll definitely put you guys in touch. So.
Wonderful.
And this is and it goes back to this beauty. And thank you, Dennis, so much for sharing your story. I mean, it's so inspiring listening to you, and you are definitely a grounded human being. And you inspire, and hopefully we've ignited some people into action, because that's what Leading Dragons is about.
Well, that's about that dragon magic, and thanks for sharing that with me, Deb.
Thank you, Dennis.
Okay.
Have a lovely day.
You too.